In considering the meaning and the method of the spiritual life, it is well to begin by defining the meaning of the term spiritual, for on that there exists a good deal of uncertainty among religious people. We constantly hear people speaking of spirit and soul as though they were interchangeable terms. Man has a body and a soul, or a body and a spirit, they say, as though the two words spirit and soul had no definite and distinct meaning. And naturally, if the words spirit and soul are not clearly understood, the term spiritual life must necessarily remain confused. But the theosophist, in dealing with man, divides him in a definite and scientific way, both as regards his consciousness and as regards the vehicles through which that consciousness manifests. And he restricts the use of the word spirit to that divine in man that manifests on the highest planes of the universe, and that is distinguished by its consciousness of unity. Unity is the keynote of spirit, for below the spiritual realm all is division. When we pass from the spiritual into the intellectual, we at once find ourselves in the midst of separation. Dealing with our own intellectual nature, to which the word soul ought to be restricted, we at once notice that it is, as is often said, the very principle of separateness. In the growth of our intellectual nature, we become more and more conscious of the separateness of the I. It is this which is sometimes called the I-ness in man. It is this which gives rise to all our ideas as to separate existence, separate property, separate gains and losses. It is just as much a part of the man as spirit, only a different part, and it is the very antithesis of the spiritual nature. For where the intellect sees I and mine, the spirit sees unity, non-separateness. Where the intellect strives to develop itself and assert itself as separate, the spirit sees itself in all things and regards all forms as equally its own. It is on the spiritual nature that turn all the great mysteries of the religions of the world, for it is a mystery to the ordinary man, this depth of unity in the very center of his being, which regards all around it as part of itself, and thinks of nothing as separately its own. That which is called in the Christian religion the atonement belongs entirely to the spiritual nature, and can never be intelligible so long as man thinks of himself as a separate intellect, an intelligence apart from others. For the very essence of the atonement lies in the fact that the spiritual nature, being everywhere one, can pour itself out into one form or another. It is because this fact of the spiritual nature has not been understood, and only the separation of the intellect has been seen, that men, in dealing with that great spiritual doctrine, changed it into a legal substitution of one individual for other individuals. Instead of recognizing that the atonement is wrought by the all-pervading spirit, which by identity of nature can pour itself into any form it will. Hence we are to think of the spirit as that part of man's nature in which the sense of unity resides, the part in which primarily he is one with God, and secondarily one with all that he lives throughout the universe. A very old Upanishad begins with the statement that all this world is God unveiled, and going on then to speak of the man who knows that vast, pervading, all-embracing unity, it bursts into a cry of exultation. What then becomes of sorrow, what then becomes of delusion, for him who has known the unity? That sense of oneness at the heart of things is the testimony of the spiritual consciousness, and only as that is realized is it possible that the spiritual life shall manifest. The technical names by which we, as theosophists, mark out the spirit matter not at all. They are drawn from the Sanskrit, which for millennia has been in the habit of having definite names for every stage of human and other consciousness. But this one mark of unity is the one on which we may rest as the sign of the spiritual nature. And so again it is written in an old English book that the man who sees the one self in everything, and all things in the self, he seeth verily, he seeth, and all else is blindness. The sense of separation, while necessary for evolution, is fundamentally a mistake. The separateness is only like the branch that grows out of a trunk, and the unity of the life of the tree passes into every branch and makes them all a oneness, and it is the consciousness of that oneness which is the consciousness of the Spirit. Now in Christendom, the sense of oneness has been personified in the Christ. The first stage, where there is still the Christ and the Father, is where the wills are blended. Not my will, but thine be done. The second stage is where the sense of unity is felt. I and my Father are one. In that manifestation of the spiritual life, we have the ideal which underlies the deepest inspiration of the Christian sacred writings. And it is only as the Christ is born in man, to use the Christian symbol, that the truly spiritual life begins. This is very strongly pointed out in some of the epistles. St. Paul, writing to the Christians, and not the profane or heathen, to those who have been baptized, who are recognized members of the Church, in a day when membership was more difficult to gain than it is in later times, says to them, Ye are not spiritual, ye are carnal. And the reason he gives for regarding them as carnal and not spiritual is, I hear that there be divisions among you, for where the spiritual life is dominant, harmony, and not division, is to be found. And the second great stage of the spiritual life is also marked out in the Christian scriptures, as in all the other great world scriptures, when it is said that, when the end cometh, all that has been garnered up in the Christ, the Son, is garnered up yet further into the Father, and God shall be all in all. Even that partial separation of Son and Father vanishes, and the unity is